Part 5 of the Michael Manley interview is titled, you guessed it, Politics. He refers to himself as a compulsive activist. Give a listen.
I didn't know that his dad had a boxing ring that was set up in their yard when he was a young boy, that he was put on a tram car after that incident at JC and had to walk with his bag for quite some distance to get up to Drumblair regardless. He spent one day in McGill. Can you believe it? I did, in fact, know that Harold Lasky had such a profound impact on him. I also discovered that he had wanted at one point to be an art historian but changed his mind, that he used to pawn his typewriter the middle of every month while he lived in England, and that being a trade unionist is perhaps the happiest time of his life. But I must take you now to politics.
The happiest time of my public life.
Of your public life. I beg your pardon. My apologies, your public life. But politics.
Yes, ma'am, politics. What about politics?
What about it? What really got you to enter politics?
You know, well, all right, frankly, always I was on the horns of a dilemma, very often not even fully faced in myself. One half of the dilemma was my intense interest in political process. I have a tremendous theoretical interest in political process, coming from Lasky, from the years of study at LSE, etc. I'm fascinated by constitutions, political forms, organization, how do you mobilize societies, etc. So there's a great intellectual interest too, like a compulsive activist, which I am. I am always engrossed in the question of political action, which is quite different from political process, and therefore always interested in what laws are being passed, how is the economy being managed, is social transformation taking place, is there social mobility, are the poor rising. All those things fascinate me as an activist. So when I went back to Jamaica, December 51, the minute I had the first breakthrough of making a speech, which was by about February, I then said, you know something, I'm going to become group active. And I found a little group of extremely poor people who live just off Barbican Square. A lot of them don't even live there any longer. There's supermarkets and stuff there now. And I joined the group for a year. And at the end of the year, I was elected chairman of the group, and I used to go every Tuesday night to my group meeting, and we'd work on problems and sports programs for the kids and anything we could get to do. And so I loved that aspect of political life, which was to work with a group. And all this was happening at the same time as I was getting involved in the trade union movement. But the other half of the dilemma comes from the fact that very early in my life, I had decided I did not wish to do anything that my father had done. You know, you grew up in a thing where, you know, NW he was beyond a giant. This was an icon in his lifetime. He was spoken of in tones of awe as scholar, sportsman, athlete. Still, I say without fear of contradiction, the finest lawyer the Caribbean has ever produced, the most complete. Jamaica welfare, founding the nationalist movement and leading. You know, how do you deal with that? You know, how does a kid deal? That is beyond giant to titan. And so I, who adored him, loved him. To this day, I adore him. I think he was the most fabulous and lovely human being. But I thought to myself, you know, I can't compete with this. And so swimming, not track, until the very end. Anything but law, though many people feel I might have made a reasonably good advocate, not law. God has him. If you get into it, you're on his coattails, trying to use your father to, you know, or they say, boy, you're not like your father. And so I said, that's not for me. And so all my life I was interested in things like advocacy and sport, trade unionism and politics, but not to ever be put in a position where I would have to compete with his reputation. And so for years I was a very intense PNP activist. By 1952 I was elected by an enormous range of votes onto their national executive because I was addressing 3 groups a night all over Jamaica. In the first year in Jazz in Jamaica, I think I addressed something like 120 group meetings.
By this time, you discovered how to finish your speeches.
Well, let us say that there was marginal improvement.
Anyway, I'm sorry to have cut in there.
At least I recognize there's a problem you have to deal with. And so I was very active in the PNP. Every general election, local government election, I'd speak for candidates all over the place, but was determined I would never be a politician, which is different from being a political activist. You know, that is to go out now to achieve some leadership position or whatever. I wouldn't do that, and I wouldn't be an MP. And it is in 1967, the old man had made me a senator in 62 because I was by then, you know, a premier trade unionist, and put me in there to speak to trade union issues in the Senate, which I did. But that's not being a representative. And in 67, how I ever got, is it boring you?
Not at all.
No, well, let me just finish the story. How I got into politics, in the sense of running in a seat which was Central Kingston, arose in a very direct way. I knew it was my dad's last election. He had very nearly won in 62. He was now facing an election in 67 where everything was rigged. The voter system was rigged. Nobody under 25 had a vote. The gerrymandering was to blow your mind. All a big factor in what I did in 1983. And they felt that Will Zizers could not win Central Kingston because it had been cut to lose. And they had to take a premier leader like him and give him a safe seat because he was a major leadership figure. And they found the safe seat for him in St. Ann. But if he went from Central Kingston to St. Ann, they feared the psychology of flight, run away. And they came to me and said, you know, would you run in Central Kingston? Because if you just from JBC strike and you're a national figure in your own right, go, it looks like strategy, not flight. And man, that was the most difficult decision of my life. My wife Barbara and I then, you know, who died, I remember we sat up the whole night trying to wrestle with the question, do I dare break out of a lifetime determination never to get into this? And in the end I thought, well, I have to do it for him because it's his last chance, and if it will help. And I did, and as you know, I barely won because it was really cut to lose, but we just managed to pull it off as a new figure, you know, who brought some excitement. So that's how I got into the thing.
1967 is when it started, and then the rest is history.
So you're getting an insight into this man and his foray into politics, how it started, how he conducted himself, what was his passion, what drove him. Well, we're preparing for part 6. And it starts in a somber way, because in part 6, we look at him losing his mother and the impact that had. And we also hear about the good and the bad of politics from his perspective. This is Faye Ellington. Thank you for listening.